Alrighty, y'all. Well, thank you for tuning in to this session again. This week we're going to be covering tabulation domination. We're just going to be looking at how we collect and clean data in our Google Sheets databases, and also just some, higher level basics of, good data collection practices. So I think we can just jump right in. Yep. So this is session two. This one will kind of lead into next week's session pretty directly. We're going to be working in Google Sheets a little bit for sure for both of these sessions. This week's going to be more focused on, you know, getting the data to a usable state first, and then next week is actually going to be, you know, deciding the best ways to break it down into useful metrics that actually have meaning. So we can just keep moving on. Again, don't think any new faces here, so I'm just gonna breeze through the about me and just turn it back over to y'all with a very basic question. Um, I shared the answers too quickly, but why do we scout? Can anyone in the chat, maybe some 422 kids can throw some answers out there, very high level, you know, what are the reasons that we like to scout?
We like to scout because it gives us important data and important metrics on like all the teams at a given competition. And so it doesn't just help with alliance selection in terms of which teams complement our gameplay best, but will also give us the best chance in elims, but also helps us prepare for matches and helps us develop some match strategies to give us the best chance at winning.
Yeah, great answer. I'm glad you have a good answer. Um, so yes, I think kind of the main reason when you think of scouting, you think of alliance selection. So as Jared said in the chat, so you can pick the partner which best complements you and gives you the best chance of achieving your goals at a tournament. There's also other benefits of scouting, and you should be, using your data along the way to kind of help with match strategy, not only during quals, but also during elims, and also watching matches to kind of just understand how other teams are playing their matches. Maybe you get some ideas on some things you could do differently, or you find some counters to how other teams are playing. Um, and just I did just drop a screenshot of a match here. This is a massive upset from 2019, 2056 and 1114, where a lot of people said the two best robots at the Detroit Championship this year. But the other alliance, realized had a bit of a weakness under defense. So they picked a great defender and they were able to pull the upset. And it was a huge deal. Would not have been able to do it if they didn't have great scouting, not only to recognize the weakness in, you know, the opponent's strategy, but also to find a defender who would actually be able to pull it off. And the other thing, if you're a technically minded person, watching matches, you kind of get an understanding of which, mechanisms on other robots are, actually functioning well versus, you know, which ones might be a little slower. And that might help you this year if you're adding something onto your robot, and might help you in future years when you're deciding, you know, your design strategy. So can click through again. So before really start selecting your scouting method and building your scouting database, you really first want to figure out what you actually want to be collecting data on during your matches, right? So one thing we did this year was uh, before, right after kickoff, before any of the kind of online scouting resources were released, we created our own priority list of what do we think would be valuable to have and kind of tiered, here's metrics that we absolutely need. Here's metrics that would be nice to have, and here's some things that are just you could theoretically do them, but it'd be a little silly. So like for example, like this year, we decided we really obviously needed to be able to differentiate between what level teams were placing coral on. A nice to have for us was the location, or at least like the side of the reef. And we'll talk about not a lot of the pre-made online apps kind of fit that. So that was something we had to cut. But it would have been nice. And then, you know, something we didn't care about. Um, I'm not even sure. I mean, so we collected it obviously, but like autocrosses, we'll get into why you don't need to. Well, it says it right here actually, is because it's available through your FMS data and through your TBA API. Typically, it's going to provide you with which robots crossed in auto, which robots climbed in endgame, and what like the total scoring for each alliance was, in both the net and on the reef, other games, similar things. Um, and so because of that, we kind of figured we'd be able to just pull that in. Didn't really need to. Just be aware that anything that is only available on the alliance level, you're going to struggle to, boil that down to individual team data. So that's kind of the first step of, setting up our scouting system for the year. Next up, looking at scouting methods, right? Uh, there are a lot of different pre-med apps online. I think we mentioned QR Scout, love it, um, and Scout radios being a few. And if you're not aware of like what those are, QR Scout is pretty nice because you just fill out all your data and it lets you actually edit what you're collecting. And then when you're done, I won't be able to do it because I actually have to fill it out, but you can just hit the commit button, shows up with a QR code, and then you can scan it and upload it offline, which is sweet. And then Love It is, a bit more inclusive of an app. It has you can assign scouter schedules and generate metrics on the app. We'll talk about some of the weaknesses that we saw with it in just a second. So there are all of these resources available, and it can be a little bit difficult to choose, right? So what we did was we kind of came up with those list of, needs based on, what we wanted to collect data-wise, but also, what functionality we wanted to see out of the app, right? It needed to be able to upload offline in case we didn't have any access to the internet. We wanted to be able to ideally, pre-populate your scouter schedule. That way you don't end up double scouting. We'll talk about that again in a second. And we kind of thought about it not just from, a data need perspective, but also thought about it from what would best suit the environment that we are going to be in at our events and, the students who are going to be scouting. And then we also tested it before our first competition. We actually went to a week one for a little bit and just kind of, gave it a full system check, taught people how to use it, which having that kind of test run, I think really helped us get off on the right foot at our first competition. And then I just have this link here, but it's a good. I can just kind of show it real quick because I didn't actually open it, but it's just a list of kind of everything that's available in terms of different apps and resources. I think there's some, yeah, like pre-scouting apps and game resources as well. So I'll drop this in the chat. Yes, I will. Cool. So back on this. So kind of wanted to go over what we've done in the past specifically. So back in my day, I graduated in 2019. Back in my day, we used paper. And when I was a senior slash end of my junior year as well, that's when we finally started actually uploading it to a Google sheet and manually entering every single tally mark that people were putting down. And we had someone dedicated at the competitions to doing only that, which ideally you don't have dedicated data enterers that literally like they can't even really watch the matches. So the nice thing about paper was, you know, it will never crash on you. It never, has any kind of technological issues, but uh it does require more manpower and also a lot of organization because we literally just had a massive bin that we carried around that ended up getting like just overflowed every year and tabbing through and trying to find a certain match. Never easy. I think 2023 was our first year using QR Scout as I showed. And QR Scout, honestly, it's pretty great, right? It's really simple to use. You just have these different, check boxes, counters, whatever, and you can actually edit, what you're looking at. So having those kind of data collection needs isn't as big a deal. It is a little annoying having to scan every match. You do need a dedicated scanner. It's a lot quicker than manually typing everything in, but still an extra person that you have to have assigned. Love It was something we started using this year. And, there's a few upsides to it for sure, right? It has your auto pathing, first of all, which in some games, very important to be able to, actually differentiate between what, if you're trying to coordinate an auto, being able to see which autos your teammates ran and which were successful, which weren't. You can see that in the app, which is sweet. Kind of has this, interface with the actual field layout, which is sick, and so easier for scouts to kind of understand where things are. And as I said, you can preload your scouter schedules on there, so it just pops up with the team that they're scouting. And there's a whole list of other cool things you can do in it. The downsides, though, um, so it did offer, automatic uploading to, Lovett server, where you could then export the data if you chose, and it didn't give you every single field, which was annoying. Or you could use their in-app analytics, and their in-app analytics were, yeah, not the best. And so, moving forward, they're going to update the app. We'll see kind of what changes they make, but ideally, they give you a little more flexibility to actually play with the raw data itself. But because it was, uploading it needed the internet and competitions, uh, also uploading the scouter schedule. It was a little difficult for sure to kind of make sure that all of our iPads were at some point getting uploaded. We also, lost, we didn't have live data because, we weren't keeping those permanently connected to the internet. We had run like a hotspot between matches every few matches and then have everyone upload. And that whole process was a bit of a pain. So there's drawbacks to really every method, right? There really isn't a perfect method right now. Um, you can create a custom app. The issue with a custom app is you're probably going to need a dedicated programmer for it. And if it's your team's best programmer, they probably have other priorities at competition. So if you run into issues, you're out of luck. So that is what we've done in the past to actually collect data. In terms of analysis, we've really only ever used Google Sheets, and I'll show off our Google Sheet in just a moment. But you have a lot of options, and almost all of them can do the same thing. It just gets there in a different way. So kind of just pick the thing you're most comfortable with. I will say the nice thing about Sheets is being able to easily share data and actually get into the individual data itself. With some of these other ones, um, R, Python, like your coding languages, it can be a little bit more difficult to actually pick apart your individual numbers, right? So that's one of the reasons why I like having a spreadsheet where you can see everything. If you need to change a number, you just type over it. Uh, and the other thing to kind of think about, the nice thing with sheets, you can just duplicate the sheet year to year, and we change a few fields, boom, 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 we're done, right? And so that makes it really easy to kind of get your whole database going. So, okay, that was kind of my slides for today before we actually jump into the Google Sheets. Before we take a look at our database and then also start actually kind of working through how I built it, how our scouting team has built it. Do we have any questions anybody wanted to ask? Might take a quick 2-minute water break. Okay. Well, I'm gonna, wait for a minute. If anyone has anything they want to ask in the chat about anything we just went over, that's fine. I'll be jumping into Matthew, stop. I'll be jumping into our database at, let's call it 556. Resuming the recording, and let's get back into it. So first thing I'm going to show off is, and I forgot to actually copy this, but so this is kind of our scouting database. This example was pulled from our district championship, and there's some interesting things in here. I'll say we're always tweaking it, so some things might not look super polished, but generally, day of competition, most things work. So kind of we have our raw import. This is what we pulled straight from Loveit. And then this is kind of where we clean it up, and we'll get into why there's some errors here and kind of work through everything. Then we kind of pull out some metrics from that. And then we have a whole bunch of different like kind of analysis sheets, right? Where we have a team lookup where we can, and this sometimes happens when you're looking at it on your phone, split C's, but a team lookup where you can, see individual team data for all of their matches and then kind of just a little visualization over time. Uh, there is kind of a few different averages sheets, and we'll talk more about, averages versus medians, maxes in our next session. We have a match view and actually a better match view that we'll take a more of a look at last in the match strat session, as well as just a few other kind of miscellaneous sheets. One thing we did do, as I mentioned, we are kind of just pulling in a lot of data from the Bull Alliance. So like this is where we pull in crosses and climbs, also pull in the match schedule from TBA's API. I will show what we use for that, but I won't go over it. So we have this app script, and I don't actually know Google script really at all. I can fake my way through it a little bit, but ChatGPT is a very good tool for actually getting this stuff done. So, I have it pull in all of these different things for each individual match, have it pull in the schedule for the full event, and that's what we use for getting that in, as well as for a little bit of data validation is another thing that we did. Uh, in terms of scatter accuracy, again, a lot of errors here, but we tracked like across an entire event how each scouter was performing in case anyone, needed a little boost. And the way we did that wasn't a perfect solution, but we looked at the total coral that an alliance had scored in a given match. Uh, okay, I'm sorry, I don't know why this headset does this, hasn't had this issue before, but um, yeah, we pull in the total coral that an alliance scored according to FMS data, and then compare that to what our scouters said was the total coral scored for that alliance, and then just average that out over the course of an event. Kind of just gives us an idea of how good we were doing. This event was, pretty solid. A lot of almost everyone was 80s to mid 90s. So uh, definitely happy with that. So that's our sheet. And so what we are going to do now, if you want to follow along, you can. If you don't want to, that's fine too. I'm going to start working through the first steps of building that and kind of the actual Google Sheets functions and whatnot. So I'm going to, yes, Tori, that's correct. You can use Python. I've done that in the past as well. Um, and that is a little easier for most people. So if you want to follow along, you can make a copy of that raw data. I've at least partially scrubbed the notes, just because, but I'm going to be kind of working over on this copy. So if you want to have this sheet for any reason, you can do that. Let's see. So I'll send you a copy of that version as well. And so I'm going to name this raw data, and we are going to start by creating a different sheet on this where our kind of cleaned data will live, right? So we don't care about all of these columns and we want to reorder some of these and sum of them up. So we are going to do just that. Let's call it cleaned data. Okay, and then a few things that I'm going to do here. Just going to bold this entire top row, just for formatting reasons, and then view up to one row. So I will also say as I work through this, there's a lot of ways to get things done in Google Sheets. This is not nearly the only way. Might not even be, probably not even the best way. And for a lot of this stuff, I know you can use pivot tables. They don't give you quite as much customization as I like to use, but it is a lot simpler. So if you want to use pivot tables to get it done, that is great. Okay, so, and we are just checking. We're still seeing this tabulation domination working sheet I'm sharing, right?
Yes.
Okay, sweet. All right. So first thing, and I'm gonna try to figure out a way to kind of split screen here. But first thing we want is just, bring over the stuff that isn't gonna change. So like your, match, your team number. Um, let's start with just those two. So what I'm gonna do is literally just reference this first sheet. Let's not do that. Sorry. And have it autofill, what's there. So it's just going to be the exact same thing for that. So over here, Q1, over there, Q1. And so we're just going to do equals and then click that box that we want to reference. And then I am, we're actually going to work just with the first row, and then we'll drag it all down at the end. Okay, and then for team number, we are just going to do equals here. And then, yeah, sometimes blocks here the cell that you're in, but that's okay. Okay. And then I think a good thing we could do next is your scouter initials, right? And so this mattered for us because we wanted to keep track of our scouter accuracy, right? It's not necessarily always going to be something you need, but if that's something you want to do, you will have to do that. Love it. Okay, excuse me. The way we were using Love It was we had just 6 tablets that we would pass around. And the way Love It works is it has accounts on each of those tablets that were just named like tablet 1, tablet 2, tablet 3. So we had to come up with a way to actually get Scouter initials. So that's why if you look at the notes in the raw data, each of them start off with the initials of the Scouter. And so what we need to do is if we only want the initials, we need to come up with a way to split off those initials from the rest of that cell. So what I'll do first is just next to it, I'm just going to pull in the whole thing. That way, as we're writing this, we can reference it. So what we decided to do as kind of our delimiter was after their initials, we had everyone put a colon. You'll see as you go through the data, some people didn't always do that. Data cleaning, if we were perfect about it, would involve going through and, either, using find and replace to, patch up everywhere there was someone putting semicolons instead of colons. I know that's something I did for a couple events. Still, sometimes things slip through. So we will start with just using the split function to look at this cell So the text that we want to split is here, right? And then the delimiter that we said was colon. And so we have to, denote that the delimiter is text by using the quotes around it. All right. And this is going to throw an error because there's not enough space for it to live there. So I'm going to scoot that over. And now you can see we have this ND and notes. We only want the first of these two columns, right? So you have a couple options here. Theoretically, if you wanted, you could just hide this column if you're being really lazy. Or we can use the index function. So what this will do is you can either, it takes the value from, the index of the cell that you're looking at, right? So you can, if you're looking at a whole, you know, table of cells, you can give it a row and a column, and it'll pick out only the cell that's at that row and column. Because this is, only two, all we have to give it is one value. We want the first of these two, right? And boom. Now we have the initials. And I'm going to change that reference because we don't want it to be referencing that pasted one. Instead, we want it to be the raw data. So now we have that. The next thing that we're going to want to look at, and this is kind of all the main pre-match data that we include. So now we can get into kind of your actual match data. So let's let's look through our raw data that Lovett gives us. Where is right? So this was one of the other kind of annoying things that Lovett did come up with a fix for by the end of the year, but at the beginning of the year, they didn't have the ability to separate your autonomous game pieces scored in actions from the rest of the match from teleop. So all of these, numbers over here are all looking at, full match totals, not just auto and teleop. And we like to have that breakdown. That way we can, you know, understand who's doing well at each phase of the game. So one weird solution that we came up with, and I'll actually bring back over this sheet, was we made this table, and for every, possible outcome assigned, for every possible points outcome, assigned the number of game pieces that probably were scored as a result of that. And there's a couple issues with this I'll get to in a second. But for example, if you 3 points, that means you literally only crossed. 6 points, the only possible way to get to that was scoring an L1 and crossing. And 7 points in L2 and crossing, 9 points, and so on and so forth. And so I made this whole table to kind of work through that. The issue here is, especially at later events, some of these have other possible combinations that we kind of just ruled out, including, I don't remember the exact math on some of these, but it's for some of these higher ones where, we said, okay, like 19 points was for L2. Well, what if it was like 2L1, and it was really, we kind of ruled out the mixes of autos where there were some teams at the end of the year, especially like your kind of ground intake teams who were doing, you know, 2L2 and 2L4 type of deal. So beginning of the year, we didn't have that capability to look at that. I think for this, we can just, what I'll do is I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I am just going to grab the numbers from this. Okay, and I will real quick talk about kind of how we actually get these numbers. But let me actually put this in this sheet too, in case anyone wants that. So real quick, I'll kind of talk about what we actually did. It's a little bit of a confusing formula, right? But basically, we looked at, okay, how many points did this team score in auto in this match? Based off that table, we used these filter functions, right? And found where in that list of possible autos that point total corresponds to. And so using that, that's how we got our auto data. And so again, I'm just going to cheat. I don't want to go through that whole formula right now. It's a little high level for the intention of this course, but we will keep moving on. So now that we have your mobility and your auto corals scored, I'm just going to drag this away again. We can look at your teleop. We're also working under the assumption that, you know, auto algae doesn't really matter that much compared to, auto coral just because there's no point bonus. Now, at the highest level, teams were doing algae autos. So, when we did have that capability through Love It, that we did look at that. But for the sake of this, we'll just ignore that. So let's pull in now. Let's do our tele level 1, tele level 2. Okay. So as I said before, these numbers in the raw data are totals, right? Teleop and auto. So to get only the teleop, because we have the auto, what we can do is we'll just grab this total and then just subtract out what we're saying they scored in auto. And yeah, sure, we can autofill. So now we have that. And the nice thing about the way that we've laid out, because our level 1 is next to our level 2 on all kind of 3 of these different areas that we care about, right? We can just copy this and paste it, and that will adjust the formula properly because you shifted it one to the right. It is going to automatically shift every part of that formula one to the right. So raw data R is our total, and then F2 is the auto level 2, right? And so we can do that for all of these, and then kind of the same way, you shift it to the right. If you shift it down, it'll automatically adjust as well. So we can do that. And a quick way to do this, if you just double click that little dot there, it will paste and go to everything. So we have now done with our teleop coral. We can keep looking at other things in teleop. Some things that we collected really didn't end up using that much were like intakes specifically, which I think where, oh yeah, coral pickups. We didn't look too much at pickups. We looked more at just like scores and drops. So we can look at coral drops next, and we're literally nothing fancy that we got to do here. We just do that. And then we can paste that all the way down as well. And then we can also just pull in our algae from here. Because as I said, algae between auto and tele doesn't have any difference in scoring. So we'll just do net and processor. And then we'll grab, and I flipped these. So I'm actually going to flip them back on my end too. And boom. So I'm gonna double click down here to have this drop all the way down. And just like that, we have all of the kind of game piece scoring stuff done. Now for end games, we can, I'll work through kind of what we originally did. So as I mentioned earlier in the session, your end game data typically is going to be available through, you know, FMS through your TBA API. So at the end of the year, we're just pulling that straight in from that. At the beginning of the year, though, we were actually using our scouting data. And so we'll take a look at what it gives us, right? So it tells you whether they parked, did not attempt, they failed a deep climb, successfully deep climb, failed a shallow climb, or successfully shallow climbed. And so what we want, instead of having kind of just one column to tell you which happened, we want to kind of break those apart, right, into, and I'll just ignore shallow climbs for the sake of this. Let's just say failed deep, successful deep, park, and not attempted, right? And so for the sake of being able to easily analyze like the percent of matches where they successfully deep climbed versus, attempted, it's just easier to work with separated columns rather than having, one kind of column with all the options in it. So we can use a few different options here for this formula, but kind of the easiest way to do it is just with an if function. So what we want is we want that column to return, let's just say, return a 1 if they fail to deep climb in that match, right? So we're going to look at that cell, comma, and oh, excuse me, we need to finish our full expression, right? So what we want that to be is if that cell equaled, and let's make sure we type it exactly the same, just kind of copy it actually. That cell equals failed deep, then it's a 1, else it's a 0, right? And you just drop that all the way down. Now, anytime anyone failed the deep, this column will return it correctly. And we can do the same thing with these. Something I want to show off here, when you're pasting like to cells across a row, but you want them to reference cells in the same column on a different sheet or in a different place, what you need to do is you need to put a $sign before either the row or column. And what that'll do is it'll make it a sticky reference. So when you're pasting it, it will refer to the same cell rather than, shifting as we were looking at before. So we want to, keep it in the Y column, but we still want it to shift as we move it down, right? So what we're going to do is go back over here, shift the Y, right? And I'll just copy and paste that, or sticky the Y. And then now we are good to copy and paste over here. Still do need to change this from fail deep though to, and I'll just again make sure we get it exactly right. It just says deep. So boom. And we can just do that for park and not attempted. So parked is just the word parked, not attempted. Is that? And not attempted. Alrighty. So now we have our in-game stuff. And the last thing we can just pull in real quick is just grab the notes, just so we have them here as well. And then paste those down. And again, as I said before, some of these notes weren't properly tagged, so that's why they got, you know, didn't get scrubbed properly, and then they also the initials would get screwed up because of that. But that is okay. So this is kind of really the meat of, you know, what we need in our clean data. There is some other columns we could bring in as well, but for the sake of this session, I don't think we'll need to look at any of that. So I guess I'll take a quick pause for any questions, anything you want me to go back over on that, if you're following along. If not, can move on in just a second. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. Alrighty, so next up, why don't we take a look at our kind of analysis sheet as we called it, right? So as a kind of intermediate step before we, actually get into our analytics, we like to kind of create summations of, how many points did a team score in a match, how many coral total did a team score in a match, and those sorts of things. That way it makes it easier once we decide to go in and take averages to, have those numbers already available, and you're not having to work in formulas within formulas. So we can call this analysis. And what we're going to do is kind of start off with the same kind of first few like initial columns that we had before. Right. So I'm actually just going to kind of copy this stuff right here and paste it in. And I'm also going to freeze our top column or top row, excuse me, which if you missed that the first time, just go into view, freeze. It's right there. And what that does is just makes it so when you scroll, that top row stays. So what we want to do here is go through each phase of the game, total up, how many coral did they score in auto? How many points did they get from, you know, moving or from scoring coral? How many pieces did they score in teleop? How many points did they get in endgame? And how many pieces and points did they score in total? And so a little bit of math goes into this, a little bit of understanding just kind of how the scoring system works in general. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a border here just to kind of make everything look a little bit nicer. And then I'm Actually gonna move that over one. I don't think I needed another column there. That's okay. Let me just undo that. Sorry. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to want to look at is autonomous, right? And so I'm actually just real quick going to make this a little bit prettier. So we're going to merge these cells and just label this pre-match. All right, and then we're going to center it. Nope, wrong thing. Center that. Okay, nice. And then over here is going to be auto, which we will worry about centering that once we have all our columns in. Just going to bold everything real fast. And that actually unbolded everything. So first part of auto that we want to look at is just with mobility. We pulled that in last time, so let's just pull in the number of points that you get from that, right? And so we can do this again with a simple if statement. So if my equals if here your mobility is true, because this is a nice true false value. We don't even need an expression. If it's true, they score 3 points, else they score 0. Right? Done. That easy. That's all we need for mobility. Next, let's figure out how many oral did they score in total in auto. So for this, just going to use the sum function. Again, it's pretty straightforward. We can just drag her across all 4 of our levels. Close that. Boom. Next up, we can look at just the total points they scored in auto. And we can cheat here a little bit because this is actually just available to us in the raw data. And so I'm just going to just use that. If we didn't use that, you'd have to actually go through and multiply, each level of coral that they scored on by the number of points it's worth, and then add in the points from mobility at the end. It's not that bad. We'll have to do that for teleop in just a second, but okay. So I'm just going to add in another border, just did the same thing, gonna merge that cell using this little merge cell button up here, centered it, and then we're going. So next we are going to get into teleop. All right, and similar stuff here. So let's just do telecoral. All right, and we can not there. We have our clean data. Going to use a sum again. Drag it across our 4 levels. Bang, done. Then we can look at tele algae as well. All right, and we have 2 places we can score algae. Sum those up. Done. And then let's also just pull in total tele pieces scored, which is just going to be the sum of these 2. And then tele points. And this is kind of where things get a little bit trickier, right? Because, each level is actually worth a different number of points, and algae, depending on where it's scored, is worth a different number of points. So let's work through that. Why don't we? let's do our equals. All right. And so what we're going to do is our level 1 is worth 2 points each. So we multiply by 2. Right. And then let's keep going. A level 2 is worth 3. A level 3 is worth 4. And a level 4 is worth 5. So that's your total coral points in Telly. If we want to bring in net or algae points, which we will, it does get a little bit weird with how you want to count processor. Um, for us, we didn't really value it, at the full 6 points, obviously, because the other alliance can just get 4 back. At the, by world champs, teams were, hitting their human player shots pretty consistently. Although I know, there were some matches that were decided either because human players didn't see algae or missed the shots. For the sake of this, let's just keep it at the 2 point swing that you were going to get. So let's do this. And then your net algae are worth 4. So now you have your points scored in Teleup. And I think this is all we really need. So let's merge it again, center it again, and let's drop down this, sorry, drop that border. Okay, in the chat, saw a couple messages. Does that mean you can't delete rows from the raw data sheet? How does deleting rows work? Right, so I'm actually going to just go ahead and drop this all the way down, and we'll see what happens when I delete a row. And then I'll undo it. All right, so if you hit this just delete row button, it's gonna not like you that much because what the cell that you were just referencing just got erased. So that is one kind of issue with doing it this way. If you have multiple people in the sheet, you have to make sure that they're not deleting the rows. If you just actually go through and select the whole thing and then hit the delete key, that will work fine. It'll, actually just reference the blank cell. But if you use that delete row option, that will break it. That's a good call out. And Matthew, yeah, sure. Anyways, let's move on to endgame here. So all we care about, let's not make typos. Barge points, right? So depending on, what a team does, obviously if they deep climb, they get 12. If they park, they only get their 2. So we need to kind of account for each of those different situations. Something you can do with that is use nested if statements. Can't remember, there is a switch as well in this, which will kind of, instead of using nested if statements, let you account for multiple different cases. Kind of do need to remind myself of what exactly, because I know different languages use different formats for the switch. Okay, yeah. So we can just use this. All right. And I'm actually, for the sake of what we're doing here, going to go back to our raw data. That should not have done that. And we're going to use switch on this, right? And so if we are parked, then the value is 2 points. If we are deep, then the value is 12 points. All right, and this is the tricky one. If you are failed deep, we're actually going to assume if you, this is what we did. We assume if you failed the deep climb that you didn't somehow end up out of the, you know, barge zone, so you still get the park points. So we'll give them the 2 points there. And let me make sure that everything matches completely. So yeah, what this switch does is your first cell is kind of, the expression that's evaluating, and then it's looking at, in the case it's this, it returns this value. In the case it's this, it returns this value, and so on. So pretty useful function there. And yeah, now we have that. So now last thing we're going to do is, well, after I get this border in, kind of work through our full match totals, right? And we have a few of these that we can make. Don't think I'm going to go through everything that's on our sheet, but let's kind of focus on kind of the bigger things. So let's just look at total coral, total algae. I don't know why this is unfolded. Total pieces scored. We can look at, and then just total points, right? Keep it pretty simple. And these are all going to be easy because we've just kind of, worked our way through and set all this up. So total coral, this is going to be our auto coral plus telecoral. Boom, done with that. Algae, we actually kind of didn't need this because in this case, we just assumed you're not scoring algae in auto. Again, not a great assumption, but which means our total pieces scored will just be total coral plus total algae. Drop that down. And then our total points, we can just sum up our points in each phase of the game. So your endgame points plus your tele points plus your auto points, and we are done. Now I forgot, this does not give you a default 0 by default, so I should have realized that immediately. But yeah, as you can see here, it says case 2 or default. So if we don't have a value 2, it's going to just assume that you're not doing a case 2. It's just going to give you, or assume it's just a default value. So we just drop a 0 there. Now our default value is 0. So we can just copy and paste that all the way down now. And let's go all the way back up. And yes, now we are done. So now we have, some metrics to kind of work with here. We have, our total pieces scored, total points, as well as some of the more basic breakdowns. For the sake of what we're going to be covering next week, we'd also would want to have like your total coral on level 1, across auto and tele. You would want to have your, we had like total drops as well. I didn't end up bringing that in here. Couple more things there that we, did use, but it's just more of the same stuff. I think everyone here kind of understands how that all works. So yeah, I guess I'll take another short break here. Does anyone have any questions on anything we just set up here? I know it's a lot of just Google Sheet specifics, but anything at all. And then we're almost to the end of everything I want to cover here. I'm just going to walk over what we do for our team lookup. Before we get to that, any questions? Cool. All right. So before we keep moving on, I do want to call out one thing that is super helpful that we do, and you'll see a lot of it next week as we go through this team lookup sheet as well. You can see we use it a lot here. We use named ranges to kind of keep everything organized throughout our sheet, and it lets you call back data a heck of a lot easier and write formulas a heck of a lot easier than actually having to go through and refer to those ranges every time. All right. And so if you're not sure what named ranges are, I just kind of show you. What it lets you do is say, we wanted to make a named range for total points, right? So we could just call it total points, and our range for total points, I don't think it can have a space. So range for total points, we're just going to start it, at our first numeric value, and we want to run it all the way down to the end of the column. Easiest way to do that is just, leave the number off. It just knows that, yeah, you want to go all the way down to the bottom. So it goes all the way down to row 1001, which is our bottom row. And what's nice now is if we just type equals total points, it's going to give us that first value, right? And we can actually show the whole thing. I believe this works. Yeah. So you can see that referring to that name now gives us the entire range that we set it to refer to. And we take advantage of this in quite a few places. One really powerful function that you can use with this is this indirect function, right? And I'll show you why, right? So let's say we have here, I want, the row below this to be total points. If you hit enter indirect, right? And, just point it to that total points, it's going to give you the whole thing, right? Let's make another named range real quick. Let's do total pieces. And then get all of those, right? So it takes whatever, cell, or you can directly type in, quote total points. But if you're doing that, you should just, you know, not use that function. But it can take the text in a cell and turn it into the entire named range, right? So what we can do here is if we flip this from total points to total pieces, and I probably got to spell it right. Boom. Now we get that whole named range. And so that's something we use in our team lookup. So that way we don't have to change the formula at all. Literally just call in the named range. So I'll go over this filter function real quick. It's, in my opinion, I like it more. You can, if you've heard of VLOOKUPs or XLOOKUPs in Excel, they all kind of do, similar things where you're giving it criteria to find a certain cell across an entire table. So what I'm telling it to do here is I want it to filter whatever named range we tell it here, right? And I want it to pull in all the values from that named range where our team number is whatever we have picked up here, right? So we have this nice drop down here. So say I want to look at 422's data. I want it to pull in all of the total points for 422. And it makes it way easier to reorganize everything because if I wanted to like swap these two columns, I could literally just, swap the named ranges. All right. And so all of these formulas are literally the same thing. It pulls in the entire list of matches just with that formula. To do this drop down, by the way, I'll cover that too. This is using what is called data validation. You go up to data and data validation. Okay. And then we're just going to do add rule here, right? Just as an example. So what it does is you just give it, if you do drop down from a range, you just give it like a list of cells to pick from. I'm just going to pick there. Let's just do this because it's less random. Give it a list of cells to pick from. And then what it'll do is it'll give you a drop down with those cells. And there's some other options that you can do. If there's a value that's not in here that you want it to be able to take on, you can like turn off this reject the input because right now, you know, if I just type in like E, it's not going to let me, right? Because E is not like one of the options. So I can't type that in. But if you turn on uh just show a warning. Now if I type E, it will just show this little warning, but it'll actually, let you do it. So that's kind of all we do for this team lookup sheet is we use those named ranges, just pick the columns that we want, and then use that indirect formula. And this is a super useful view to us that we, use a ton throughout alliance selection. Um, while we're doing match strategy, if we want to take a deeper dive into a team's performance throughout an event, instead of, only looking at our high level metrics, we can just pull up this. We can see, what they did in every single match and kind of get a better idea of, their peaks and their floors. So yeah, time is 6:50. I think that is really all of the main information I wanted to get through today. Um, Next week, we're going to be kind of working through building averages and some of these analysis types of sheets. And I think next week's going to be fairly quick, so can also cover maybe a little bit more in how we built even like the validation stuff. But for now, I want to leave plenty of time for any questions anyone might have about Google Sheets. If anyone wants to show off their Google Sheet as well, and either get my opinion or anyone else's opinion, or talk about like some things that they've done that's worked well for them, this is a good time to do that. So first of all, any questions about the material first?
I have a question
Sure.
about how you guys, if you do collect this, how do you collect and quantify anything regarding defense? Because this is something that we like look at each year and we try to figure out like what's the best way to quantify it for this game. And I don't think we've found something that really works super well for us yet, but we try out different things. So if you do collect that, what do you recommend?
Yeah, so Love It does have, I'm trying to find it. They have like this defends button where you can click, when a team is defending, how often they're doing it. I think there's also, is it not included in this? I know there's like a defensive rating, or maybe it's just driver rating. I can't exactly remember. Um, and we started the year kind of using that, but one thing we really didn't talk about today that I was going to mention more for the like alliance selection part is qualitative scouting. We did have, a couple folks just kind of dedicated to qualitative scouting and doing things like watching how well teams were A, playing defense, and B, playing under defense. So we really haven't found a great way to quantify it just because, you know, every scout is going to have a different idea of, you know, what good defense looks like in their mind. Um, we do kind of use this defends number just to understand how much of the match were they playing defense, but it's hard to actually like come up with a number to
Yeah.
put to that.
Yeah, I think we what we wound up doing, maybe like halfway through the season is we actually changed it to like what percentage of the match are they defending? And we quantified it that way and just had to instruct our scouters on like if it's a for about this many seconds, this is 25%, this is 50%. But yeah, all right, that answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it, it was, I don't know. It's good to have that at least partially quantitative variable. We just kind of like just use the qualitative data to actually like understand what good versus bad, like who's good or not. But uh, I think if you have that part of it, that's really all you can ask for. So, yep, sweet.
Whatever.
Andrew, oh, sorry, Tori, what were you
Never
gonna say?
mind. I don't want to butt in too much,
No,
but
go
one
for
thing
it.
I
Go
will
for it.
say is that when we do qualitative scouting, a lot of times we try to get some people with more experience
Yep.
onto it. We know we're going to have, what I want to call like high leverage. Like when you have a situation where you know that you're deciding between some set of teams and the role's probably going to be this, which team do you pick?
Yep.
Like if you know you're picking a defense bot in the second round, maybe you have a short list of bots that your scouters think could be solid defensive options, and then you look deeper into those specific options and people with more resources. Um, I know that multiple times, multiple teams that I've worked with and talked with do something like that, where they allocate more resources to teams that they think are more likely to be the team they're ultimately picking. So I think getting more eyes and more experienced eyes on teams often helps out a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good call out. Yeah, for our qualitative scouts, we have, a smaller group of scouts and they are, as Tori mentioned, more experienced. And so what we can do is kind of, calibrate them a little bit better on, what specific details we want to see and how we're comparing across teams versus if you just have everyone doing it, what's really good driving in someone's eyes might be, you know, mid in someone else's. So uh the only real great way around that, if you're not doing like intense scouter training, which can be a lot to ask for, is to kind of have that smaller group of qualitative scouts. Yeah. Andrew, getting to your question, yes. So I will be posting the recordings. This one I probably will just put up uh, without much editing. Last week's one, I want to kind of cut it down a little bit. That went a little longer than I was hoping to, and there was uh, just some other things I wanted to kind of cover with that. So I'll try to get that up fairly soon. This one should be up sooner than later, though. So yes, of course. Alrighty. Any other questions on the material or how we collect data? Real quick, actually, I do want to just go back to uh, our team lookup. The other thing I didn't mention was this chart. Um, Actually, I'm just noticing why is it? It's not supposed to be. Oh, it's because I have this row unhidden. Normally, I hide this row. Um, yeah, this chart is super easy to make. Really, all you do is just let's close this. If I double tap this, it'll show you. But you just highlight like the first column that you want to have, and then let's just say total points. All right. And I'm assuming most people know how to do this, but just insert your chart, and then you can pick, which axis or which variable you want on which axis. Um, and this needs to be why does this? Okay, well, sorry. let's just make that E, and then yeah, we can just remove these. Where did this just go? All right, it wants to be annoying on me right now. That's because it's a count. It's not some. There you go. And then you just switch it to a line graph. And so if you just bring in these other columns of series, just expand your data range out past, the column. And yeah, this just kind of gives us an idea of performance throughout an event just at a glance. So you can see, you know, if they were broken for the full start of the event and then kind of really started spiking afterwards. Cool. All right. That's kind of the last thing I wanted to share with that. All right. Any questions about anything? Anything 422 related? Anything scouting related? And did anyone else, you know, have, ideas in their Google sheet that they wanted to share?
I will say it's encouraging that our Google Sheet looks very similar to your guys's. So it's good to know that we're on a similar track.
Mhm. Yeah, and I know, like honestly, this, it could be a little more public, polished, but I really think we have like everything that we really need here. Um, there are, some things we could do to kind of step up like a visualization game. But yeah, I think nothing here too complicated. So that's, it's good to hear that y'all have something similar to us too. So, and I've seen, similar things from other teams as well. From some pretty high level teams have had, Google Sheets that looked like this. Like I think I remember Rush had one that was fairly similar. They had some like one view that they had was um like a team comparison with like all six teams on it, where it
We
would
do,
like mhm,
yeah, we do have something like that where we actually can put like multiple robots on a graph and see like how are they doing. Like, because when we're trying to compare different teams, it's a lot easier to look at them all on a graph in like a visual
mhm.
form than just looking them all up individually.
Yeah, and where I think at Champs I had a couple graphs set up. I'm a fan of graphs sometimes. I think especially like your box and whisker plot type of things. Um, those can be useful, but we haven't really found too much of a need for it in the past. Um, sometimes it can get a little confusing to look at if you don't have the right type of graph. I've seen some teams kind of fall into that trap, but yeah, I mean that type of view is really useful. Alrighty.
So, about bumper data.
Yeah.
So, do you all collect any bumper information, like bumper quality, bumper type, number of bumpers?
I will turn this into a more serious question about like
Darn.
pre-scouting. Um, I think like it's something we've done in the past, but we didn't do it this year. It's not something you super need at like your early events when there's not that many teams. You can really get like pretty comfortable with what everyone's capable of. But probably moving forward, beyond just like having our pre-scout that we do for Worlds, I think having hit scouting just to kind of get information about, what teams have, especially like in terms of autos that they haven't been able to show it all. because a lot of times teams have like tricks up their sleeves that, you'd be able to get out of them if you actually talk to them in the pit. And kind of before alliance selection this year at Worlds, a lot of teams were, selling themselves and they had things that they couldn't show off. So I think pit scouting in the future might for those like later events specifically, DCMP maybe, but definitely Worlds. Probably something we want to go back to. But yeah, bumper quality is, yeah, we just pick based off bumpers. Yep, for sure.